Hi everyone, it's Jenny Rae. I wanted to just welcome you to our webinar today. If you guys can hear me, we're going to use the chat in the left-hand bar just to make sure that I can see you. So just say hello or type where you're dialing in from, and we'll go ahead and get started. We've got Berkeley, Phoenix, Toronto, Chicago, Santiago, right at this moment. Awesome. New York, Houston, London, New York. Awesome. Well, welcome you guys. We're going to have a couple more people that are joining us on the call today. Excited just to have you here, and we have a lot of good stuff to cover. Thank you to those of you who submitted questions. As we were preparing for the webinar, we just realized that because of the interest in keeping our time structured, we wanted to make sure that we grouped everything into categories. So Naman, our operations manager, some of you guys have had the opportunity to interact with him, put together a compiled list of questions in a couple of sections. So just wanted to overview for you which ones we're going to cover and how we're going to walk through that. And then I'm just going to dive in. As I'm going through these, at the end of each one of the sections, I'll just pause. And if there are any additional questions that you have about that topic, go ahead and type them in the left-hand chat bar, and I will answer them now. And then afterwards, we'll move on to the next section, and we'll do the same thing. So I will stick around for as long as you guys are here. If this takes 15 minutes, that's cool. If it takes 20 or 30 minutes, that's fine. If you continue to have questions, our job is just to be available to you. So the sections that we're going to cover tonight, the first one is recruiting. The second one is interviews in particular. The third one is industries and specific questions about firms. The fourth is consulting skills. And the fifth are just great creative ask anything miscellaneous questions. So 5 key categories, once again, recruiting, interviews, industry, consulting skills, and miscellaneous. So as we're just headed through to get started, the first one is in the recruiting section. How often do firms hire engineers or people with maybe just a graduate diploma in business administration? Okay, so I'm going to lump this into a more general question that we often get so that it hopefully will apply to a lot of you, which is basically like, how often do firms hire people that do not have an MBA or do not have an undergraduate business degree? I'm going to just break the sections out into 3 different categories. Basically, as an undergraduate, if any of you guys are undergraduates, it does not matter what your degree is as long as you have either quantitative coursework or quantitative work experience. So engineers at the undergraduate level are, for example, very highly desired. In fact, when I worked at Bain, I would say that the most fantastic people that I worked with, the strongest performers, were almost universally engineers because they had the solid analytical skills, the ability to use Excel and other advanced statistical modeling software to really solve problems. So engineers at the undergraduate level, very desirable. Engineers at the experienced higher level, the less experience you have, the more desirable you are. They're kind of concerned that engineers get more and more focused on specific categories or areas. If you happen to be an engineer who does have more work experience, we've worked with a lot of those. We've helped reposition them. Everybody who's worked for large international conglomerates all the way down to small businesses, and they have all made successful entries into consulting. The key, though, is making sure that you have beyond engineering, well-rounded business experience, and that you tie your engineering work back to the strategy of the organizations that you're working with, including cost savings and revenue generation. And then the third category are graduate degrees, so people that are doing a graduate degree in something other than an MBA. Firms, depending on the size of the firm, will be more interested in them. So the larger the size of the firm, the more interested they are in you. So for example, McKinsey, the largest of the strategy firms, and Deloitte, the largest of the big 4 firms in terms of consulting, are the most actively interested in engineers. Graduate diplomas in business administration or other kinds of graduate degrees really don't end up mattering too much to the consulting firm unless you have work experience in between. So they are familiar with, they're comfortable with the traditional trajectory, which is that you go through your undergraduate work, you take a few years to work, ideally 1 or 2 at a minimum. Then you go back and you get an MBA or a law degree, or even perhaps an MD. So anything that are in those categories would be highly desirable. If you have other specific questions, we can talk about those a little bit offline. Okay, so that's the first question. The second one is, how can people with a sub 3.0 undergrad GPA overcome a flaw like a sub 3.0 undergrad GPA? Acknowledging that in graduate school, we've got a 3.7 or above, but recruitment starts early. So let me just talk about this in general. Anything that's bad in terms of your background, like a negative GPA under 3.0, in fact, actually really anything under a 3.3, we would argue for leaving off your resume and really advocating for what is good about you. So somebody can take you to an interviewing committee and not even mention your undergrad GPA and instead mention where you worked, what kind of person you were when they talk to you, and also where you're going to business school. So basically just focus on all of the good stuff and remove anything that's not good. That's actually also true for GMAT scores. So GMAT's under 700. We don't usually recommend putting on your resume. And in addition, any kind of like graduate degree that's not good, we recommend not putting on there. Many graduate schools are actually grade non-disclosure, so you can't even put it on there. So essentially the core theme in this, and again, we've worked with a lot of people who very successfully overcome this, is that you have to make sure that you focus the attention of your recruiters, the people that you're networking with, on your strengths, and don't even mention your weaknesses. If you don't have enough strengths, then that's where you're going to want to bulk up. So basically, there's nothing you can do about the 3.0 GPA, but you can build on work experience. You can build on leadership. There are other things that you can do. Great. Number 3, after graduating college, spent a year with a Big Four accounting firm before joining a small consulting firm. I've been with the consulting firm for 4 months, but the type of work they do is very different than what I was told during the interview process. By the way, just as an aside, we have heard this a million times. So not a big surprise here, especially for the small consulting firm, because they always will try to sell you on the sexiest project that you do. And then 90% of your work might be on something else. How can I get noticed without having access to on-campus recruiting events? How can I avoid looking uncommitted or unsure, given this would be my 3rd job in 2 years? So basically, Big Four accounting firm, totally good brand name resume, not a big surprise when you leave there, as long as you have an explanation for why you wanted to join the consulting firm. So the major thing that people are worried about in under a 2-year period job hopping is that you got fired. So you have to explain, whether you got fired or not, what your strategic focus was on moving from one job to another. A lot of people will understand that opportunistic, really smart people will move from one job to another in a very fast period. In fact, somebody that I worked with at Bain went to Wharton, worked at Bain for 6 months, and then took on a job for 3 times the salary as a corporate development specialist in a industrial products manufacturing firm. She only worked at Bain for 6 months. Does that look bad? Sure. Does it look bad that she took on a much more high-powered strategic role? Probably not. It was actually totally fine for her career. So basically, that's kind of question number 1, is just make sure as you're writing to people or positioning everything, that you can focus on that. Then to answer the second part of the question, access to on-campus recruiting events, great question. I think the key issue here is that those provide you with natural networking opportunities. Okay. You have to now create your own networking opportunities. So if there are not natural networking opportunities that are handed to you on a platter, you will be responsible for reaching out to people. And that is easy to do. In fact, we have a whole course about it because I think it's very straightforward, but it's nuanced. So it's not natural, but it's easy. And so if you're interested in that, it's only $95 for the course. And it's a networking course. We basically talk about how to have not just one, but multiple contacts in multiple firms and how to use that for your advantage. And again, a lot of people have found that super duper successful. In addition, number 4, so question number 4, it seems really difficult to go from a part-time MBA program to a management consulting role. Do you have any advice? I've heard I will need to quit my current job and apply for an internship. Okay, so depends a little bit on the part-time MBA program. Part-time MBA programs are challenging in the first place just because they present a opportunity for the MBA programs probably more than the students that are in them sometimes. to go to a management consulting role, the challenge is that you are really considered by management consulting firms as an experienced hire, not as an MBA student. So you don't fit their MBA quotas, you don't fall into their MBA timelines. And so as long as you know that, then you just deploy a different strategy than you would as a full-time MBA student. So if that is shocking or surprising to you, I'm sorry, but that's something that should have been very fully disclosed at the beginning of the part-time MBA programs, which is that they are great for your learning experience and really good for long-term career. They're not as great for short-term immediate job prospects in terms of access to on-campus recruiting. So you should not have to quit your current job just in the same way that you wouldn't if you were working post your MBA. You just really need to treat it as an opportunity to network with people. And again, same themes, right? Explain what is strong about you, what you've done well in your previous jobs, and your MBA is kind of an additional bonus point, not the core theme. Okay. Number 5, how do you suggest recent grads coming from non-target schools break into consulting firms? So recent grads, non-target schools break into consulting firms. You have to think from the consulting firm's perspective. Okay. Consulting firms don't go to non-target schools for a reason. Why? They're unsure of the quality of the candidates they're going to get there. How do you ensure that they know your quality before they bring you in for an interview? This goes back to the same thing as number 3. For number 3, my recommendation was very active networking based on your strengths specifically related to your experience. So if you're coming from a non-target school, you have to have something on your resume that indicates that you would be a qualified candidate for the firm. Ideally, a brand name company of any kind would satisfy that. So you have a non-brand target school, a non-brand school. You need to compensate for it with a brand work experience. If you have a brand work experience, then it's quite easy to open the door. If you open the door, then you can convince somebody that you're not a murderer or a serial killer, that you're a really nice person that would be a great consultant. And that leads to interviews really easily. So once you get the interview, there's that hurdle kind of goes away. Okay. And then what's the best way to specialize into environmental consulting as soon as possible? This is a great question. I want to target the question broadly about specialties in general. So environmental consulting is a very, very niche focus of consulting. You do not have to go into any other type of consulting to train for environmental consulting. In fact, I would imagine that after going to Bain, I would not be a better environmental consultant than if I had gone to environmental consulting on the first day. The only thing would have been if I was a partner at Bain, I might understand selling a little bit better. But in terms of moving up the ranks, really the best way to go into something very specific like engineering, environmental consulting, architectural consulting, something that's very like practice area specific. Construction consulting, we see a lot of this in the Middle East, for example, is actually just to go directly into the consulting firm. And if the consulting firm is looking for you to have experience, to go to one of the top firms that they would be serving. So if you're on the client side, it's very interesting for them to bring you in to the consulting firm side. Okay, so that's our first 6 questions on the recruiting platform. So does anybody have questions that they want to ask about recruiting before I move on to talk about interviews? Or even follow-up questions, what I talked about? Great, we've got some questions coming through, so I'll give you guys just a second to go ahead and type it in. Awesome. So I'm just going to kind of hit these as they come. Number 1, can we talk about analytics consulting? Okay, analytics consulting is a growing field, really high profit because you're using more data and fewer people. It's a really sexy part of consulting and a great place to go. Actually, analytics consulting, again, does not really require a lot of experience, but it does require some kind of quant background. So if you guys don't have that in your education, then you would be looking for it. An example of a analytics consulting firm would be a firm like APT, Advanced Predictive Technologies. They actually are some of the highest paid firms that are out there. And I've had clients in the past 12 months who have gotten offers at BCG, Bain, et cetera, and they've actually gone to APT instead because it's even more rigorous analysis, better paid, better prospects afterwards. Okay. Second question is, do firms hire in the spring or the summer? Answer is yes. Firms, let me just walk you guys really quickly in case you haven't watched our videos or read about this at all. Firms hire all year round, but they have a very a specific direct hiring season. That hiring season begins at the end of July in the US and at the end of August internationally. The firms set their targets for their core target schools. They bring in their most people through undergraduate and graduate hiring. And there are either two scenarios. One is that they meet their targets, and then they still need extra consultants for extra capacity, which is why they employ year-round hiring. The second is that they don't meet their hiring targets. Now, this happens even more at second-tier firms, which are fantastic, but more like boutique-y focused firms. Whenever those things kind of happen a little bit more, the focus is really on making sure that that you are trying to, again, network your way into firms that are having opportunities because either their business is expanding or they didn't meet their hiring targets. However, I just will put one caveat on this: hiring in spring and summer, you should never, ever in spring or summer apply through an online portal without talking to someone internally to the firm, because it's very possible that you could apply to McKinsey, New Jersey in February, and McKinsey, New Jersey is full, but McKinsey LA is open. There's no way for you to know that because the firms don't post their jobs. So there's no way for you to know that unless you actually are speaking with someone in the firm. So networking, again, I hate to harp on it, but it is so critically important, is even more important in the spring and the summer. Okay, great. Next question. Mentioned follow-up questions. What I think is the best way to follow up after an interview. So when I say follow-up questions, I actually mean very little after the interview. Honestly, everything is decided pretty much the minute that you walk out the door of the interview. They know either whether they're going to hire you or whether they're not going to hire you. And if you happen to be on the fence, nothing that you can do will change your performance. It's just really a point of capacity from their side. So follow-up questions are really inside an interview or in an informational interview. It's checking in with somebody, demonstrating your particular interest in the firm, and really listening to their answers without providing extra follow-up information. Okay? Do consulting firms create an opening if they feel like you will really add to their team because of your qualities? They may see that in you after you network. Networking does create opportunities. Consulting firms don't think of the positions that they have as, oh, we have one open position right now. They think of their total company in terms of a big number and then the percentage of that company that's utilized. So again, if demand for consulting services go up, then they're utilizing more of their consultants. They're utilizing 80 or 85% of their consultants. They're going to want to add people that they weren't planning on just to create extra buffer in their capacity. So yes, consulting firms will absolutely create an opening for you if in your networking process, you really demonstrate that you would be strong. That's why the consulting firms do look at hiring actively year round. But it's really important, again, to assess that by having a conversation with someone initially. Cool. Bunches of questions keep coming, so I'm just going to keep knocking these out. Is Big Four consulting experience seen as beneficial in consulting recruiting, even if the experience is based in ERP system implementation? So the answer is yes. And when you say beneficial in consulting recruiting, I assume you mean management consulting recruiting. The key issue here is that if you're focused on ERP implementations, a lot of people then communicate in ERP language. So they will explain in very detailed, very technical language what they were doing instead of talking about the business impact that the work had. So it's really critical if you come from a more like technical or narrow background to expand it by demonstrating the impact on the business. Great. So which industries are currently hot or sectors, especially for like MBB? Number one, healthcare. Healthcare is rapidly growing, ripe for disruption, lots of opportunities, still like a pretty high profit business, even with all of the changes that have been happening. Lots of changes are also creating opportunities. So healthcare is a big one. Energy has not been as hot lately, but it goes up and down. So if you have a specific focus or industry, expertise in energy, that can be helpful just depending on the practice in the office. And then the additional one that I would mention would be tech, media, and telecom. You're seeing a lot of changes in those industries as well as pretty high profits, which leads to lots of consulting spend. So those would be a couple of my key focus areas. In addition, so great, more questions. What kinds of things could a business undergrad do to show that they're qualified for environmental consulting? So I'm going to assume that this is going back to our environmental consulting question. Number one would be participating in extracurricular activities that demonstrate an interest in the environment. Number two would be working for a firm that is in the environmental space in a it doesn't even have to be in an internship capacity. It could be in an externship, so like a 1 week spring break or a 2 week winter break opportunity. And it finally, in addition, just making sure that you're connected with and taking coursework that might be led by advanced degree candidates. I think this question came from somebody from Berkeley. So Berkeley has an excellent network right there in the Berkeley area of lots of PhDs who have a prestigious focus on environmental issues, environmental research. So connecting with one of them and demonstrating some engagement in the classroom. So in the classroom, on the job, and extracurricularly, that would be kind of the perfect trifecta there. Okay. Another question, you mentioned working with the recruiters to make sure you highlight your strengths. Are those third-party recruiters or recruiters at the firm? So I probably wasn't specific about this. And again, for all of you guys, you all, if you don't already, can get access to our introductory videos for free. So if you haven't watched those, they're like 3 to 5 minutes each. We have a whole section on networking, totally free if you don't even want to get the networking course. But one of our key assumptions there is that we're not talking about either one, third-party recruiters or recruiters at the firm. We're talking about professionals. Professionals in consulting act as the recruiter. So while I was at Bain, I was considered a more valued recruiter than our head recruiter. Our head recruiter was an administrator of the recruiting process. I had a voice in who actually got into the season and the process, okay? Is the hiring season the same between the US and Canada with very minor nuances? Yes. Canada operates just a little bit later, but it's literally like days or weeks. It's not months. So very, very similar season between the US and Canada. Okay. Then given the upcoming shifts in trade policy, will MBBs be interested in pursuing the struggling retail and apparel sector? They're, basically all the top firms are interested in pursuing basically any sector that will pay them for services. The question is whether or not the firms themselves have the ability to hire for consulting services. The most active sector in consulting is tech consulting. That's because firms are building both cost saving and revenue enhancing tech. When you start to look at failing businesses, there isn't as much money in things like restructuring. So when you kind of start to get into my business is failing and I have no idea what to do, sometimes there just aren't really great strategies or at least premiums that can be paid for that. Okay, fantastic. So in the interest of time, thanks you guys, by the way, for all of your really active questions. This is fun. I'm going to go ahead and move on to interviews. I have 3 questions on interviews. So the first is, I've heard at McKinsey that it's better not to engage the interviewer by showing what I write on the paper when explaining frameworks and calculations. What are your thoughts on this? Okay, so there's one rule that kind of governs all other rules inside the interview, and that is that it's really important for the interviewer to see how you naturally operate. And so in between our team, we actually have a difference of opinion on this particular question. It's based on what's natural. So Lisa Bright, one of our top interview coaches, ex-McKinsey, super fantastic. She really advocates for doing this, for writing down your information, for sharing it and showing it. And for her, she's an incredibly collaborative person. That really is incredibly helpful. For me, I am much more verbally succinct and verbally structured. So for me, I actually don't need to show in my paper because I'm iterating everything as I go verbally. So they would see the same thing on the paper that they would be hearing come out of my mouth. So engage the interviewer if it's natural for you. Don't force yourself to engage the interviewer, provided that you are able to demonstrate really clear, very accurate structure in your verbal process, okay? Their main goal in assessing you is, can I trust you to do this work? And if they can see that from not reading your work, then that's great. If they could read your work and then not trust you, then that's a problem. So there's kind of a trade-off you have to really weigh there, okay? Question number 2, one of the ultimate questions. What if I get stuck in a question? What the heck should I do? So number 1, you got to laugh a little bit. Take yourself with a grain of salt. You're in an interview. You're doing a case that's hard and challenging. And it's supposed to be fun for you and fun for the interviewer. So if you start to freak out, cry, kick and scream, that's not a good situation, even if you're doing all of that silently and internally. So my number one coping mechanism to getting stuck in a question is to laugh. My number two recommendation is to reiterate the question. So make sure that you really understand what the question is asking. My third pass is to recap what you've looked at already. Sometimes just in the process of talking back through what you've looked at already, you can kind of build a foundation for what you want to talk about next. And then the fourth one is just get started. So just kind of let the interviewer know, even verbally, this is actually challenging for me to know where to start here, but I'm just going to put some ideas out there and we'll see if we can kind of build a structure as we go. So again, their focus is not on having you get right or wrong. Their focus is on seeing how you think. So handling getting stuck with a little bit of courage and a little bit of creativity, and also just a little bit of laughter can be a really good sign for how you'll handle situations where you feel stuck on the job again. Okay. And question number three, how much is the cutoff rate between first and second round and between second round and offer on average for summer internships? So best example for me is just using a pool of about 60 people. That's kind of the first round hiring option that a lot of firms take at the MBA level for full-time, for summers, and at the undergrad level for full-time. So from 60, usually they'll go down to somewhere between 12 and 20, depending on how many offices the school or the firm would represent. So let's say you're somewhere like Harvard, they're going to represent a broader offices, so they might take 20. If you're at somewhere that's a little bit more regional, let's say Georgia Tech, you're really going to basically be representing like your Southeastern or maybe Texas offices. Okay, so cutoff rate between second round and offer on average will be, again, 60 to somewhere between 12 and 20. Usually actually about 50% of those that go to the final round get offers. So you have a much better chance once you've made it into the final round to get an offer. And those who go to the final round are often actually asked, if they don't get an offer, to reapply in somewhere between 12 to 18 months. So you still have an open door. Really, your ultimate kind of win in this industry is just getting into the final round, because that keeps options open for you long term. Okay, so I see a couple of questions that are coming in, and so I'm just going to talk about this and see if I can kind of handle these as we go. All right. So we've got the first coping mechanism. Okay, so the first coping mechanism is laughter, right? Levity, just really kind of making a joke about the situation, or telling the viewer essentially like, okay, this is a challenge for me. I've never seen a problem like this, and just showing that you're not taking yourself too seriously. The second one is making sure that you go back through and reiterate the question. And the third one is going back through the details of the case that are prior to this. Then the fourth one is just making sure that afterwards you're being really clear and assertive about taking a stab at it, even if you don't quite know what's going on. BBM depends on different firms, but yeah, Bain, BCG, McKinsey. I see Navon actually answered some of those. Thanks. What would be an exit option if I go to a boutique firm? Okay, so that goes a little bit beyond interviews, but I'll just go ahead and knock it out now since we've got it in this section. Boutique firms, your exit options are to move up in the consulting chain, so to somewhere that's a little bit more general, but maybe in a key practice area. So let's say you go to a boutique healthcare consulting firm, you then become a prime candidate for healthcare consulting in a larger firm. Or the exit opportunities from really any consulting firm are into industries, and you're the prime candidate for industries that you've worked on. So if you work on a financial services consulting firm, your likely exit opportunity, if not to a financial services practice of a financial consulting firm, is going to be into a financial services firm itself. That being said, you guys, you can do anything that you want to. You have one life. So if you go into healthcare consulting and you hate it and you don't like healthcare anymore, then you can absolutely use all the same tactics that you got to get the original job, which is maybe building a little bit of experience extracurricularly, developing a network and having conversations with people and explaining the strengths that you bring to the table, to go do something totally different. So you are permitted to be wild and to not follow what everybody tells you can do, and to do whatever you want to do. Okay, so I just want to say that as well. How would I compare Deloitte with ATK? Okay, great question. ATK is very highly respected. ATK has a much narrower focus. They work harder than people do in Deloitte, to be totally fair. But they're known for being incredibly analytically rigorous. Interestingly, while I was at Bain, we hired 3 partners from ATK in one office alone. They were the only partners in that office that were not brought up through the ranks at Bain. They were in the operations practice, and they were all bringing a core competence that Bain or a lot of other firms don't have. So ATK, very highly respected, really strong people, really great backgrounds. So I would really personally advocate for ATK over Deloitte. I would just say that Deloitte, in terms of if you want to live or work anywhere, if you want to kind of have the background and flexibility, the training of a broad firm, Deloitte can be better. But I think you run into with that some more politics, more transition, less cohesion inside the firm. So in general, I would say ATK versus Deloitte, I would pick ATK, although there are benefits to both, and both are really great firms. Okay. So a question about networking. Your free videos are amazing. Okay, I love you. But thanks. So let's dive into the question. Once my materials are adequate for fit interviews, how can I best ID a potential future MBB advocate? Okay, so when it comes to networking, you are looking for, number one, if you have it, some kind of overlap. So if you've worked with someone, or you've worked at a similar firm that they've worked in, if you went to school with them, if you know someone, any kind of overlap is going to be a leg up. But honestly, you really don't need that. You just need a great story and a great introductory email. We actually do go a lot more in the course for networking into the emails that you should write. We actually talk about the structure of an email. We write email templates that you can write to people. So what you're really looking for is there like a 3-step conversion process. The first is research. So finding someone inside the firm. It's basically just looking for LinkedIn and an office and practice area that you're interested in. Ideally, if they have that overlap, that's great. Sending them an email to set up an informational interview, and then conducting the informational interview, ideally converting that to an offer for an interview. So it's really basically 3 like simple steps. And emailing people cold has surprisingly positive results as long as your email is really strong. I had, while I was at Bain, everyone assume that I had a certain number of emails that were coming in. How many would you guys assume? While I worked at Bain, how many emails did I get a year from people that I didn't know that would just write me and ask if I could talk to them about my experience at Bain? Just type your question in the chat bar. Cool. 25, 250, 100, 12, yep, 100, 200. Okay, I love you guys. You're proving my point. 10, 500, 365, one a day. I would say it was somewhere between 5 and 7 a year. Okay. I did a lot of on-campus recruiting. Okay. The on-campus recruiting was every day after we did on-campus recruiting, I would get like 50 emails from everyone that I met in on-campus recruiting. I wouldn't remember one of them. None of it was differentiated. I got a surprisingly small number of emails of people that were courageous enough to find me and reach out to me. Out of those 5 to 7, I probably knew or remotely knew about half of them in the first place. Okay. So these people are not getting spammed with emails all the time. And so if you write them a like courteous, compelling email, you'll be surprised at how many people. Okay. Yeah. So talk about a risk-averse population. Totally. The craziest thing for you guys is just to realize here, you will receive an audience. They will read your email if you write, because you're not one of a million in the way that you might feel like it. Okay. Awesome. Great. So let me see if I'm just going to pop back up there. All right. And then I'm going to go back up here and just make sure. Okay, so what package on the website we recommend for only needs work on improving interviews, both case and fit, with an interview in the firm. So we actually have like 2 pathways of packages. One is the all-encompassing packages, which starts with like our consulting job hunt, and that gives you resume, cover letter, and interviews. Then if you just want to start with interviews, you can do anything from our interview mastery, which is 4 interviews, all the way up to 10 interviews, which is our black belt program. So depending on kind of how committed you are to the industry and also how far along you are in your own practice, I would recommend starting with that. You can always start with interview mastery and then upgrade if you find, or I would say more like when you find that the sessions are actually super valuable. People are very usually surprised by how much we push them and how far we take them in the process. Okay. And then Federico, hi Federico, it's good to see you on here. The interview Bible in terms of fit interviews is awesome for preparing your questions and just really making sure that you have a good understanding. So the interview Bible is just a written resource. You can get that on Amazon or on our website. Okay. So how helpful are MBB associate alums in networking? Oh my gosh, this is turning into like such a great networking conversation. So they are super helpful. They will write you back. They will answer your questions. They can do absolutely nothing to get you an interview. So if you're after information, MBB alums are fabulous. If you're after an interview, then you should talk to somebody who is currently active at the firm. Okay. So that is a very important distinction. All right. Sweet, you guys. Let's move on. We've got these other sections that we want to cover. Industry. So what are the big differences between the auditing Big Four and the management Big Three, and do they attract different types of talented people? Okay, I cannot talk enough about how the fact that these are almost two totally different worlds. The word consulting applies in such a broad sense that it appears to look the same from the outside, but internally they're very different. Let me explain. The top three firms, so Big Three being, or top three as we call them, management consulted, McKinsey, Bain, and BCG, one of their key differentiating points is that they do not bill their clients by the hour. So while I was at Bain, if I could solve a problem in 10 minutes a month, I was allowed to do that. There were some politics that kept me from doing that completely, but for the most part, there was an incredible advocacy and speed of problem solving. For the Big Four firms, their consulting practices came out of their auditing practices. Their auditing practices are paid by the hour. They are not paid by project or deliverable. Okay, so there's a huge difference in terms of the metrics of success and the focus on what makes something powerful and really critical in terms of delivering value for clients. Okay. So there's a huge cultural difference that I think, if I were to boil it down, really is based in that. Big Four, you have the value of size. So you have a huge global network, you have huge global opportunities. You trade off for that, like I mentioned, the cohesiveness. It's kind of like the difference between going somewhere like, let's say, let's say you were going to University of Michigan, right? So University of Michigan has somewhere around 35 to 40,000 undergraduates. If I meet somebody from the University of Michigan, or I hear that they're from the University of Michigan, I actually really don't quite know what I'm getting. I could get somebody incredibly socially awkward, a recluse that never did anything while they were on campus. I could get somebody who is a athlete, and with all of the kind of excitement and drama that comes along with an athlete. I could get somebody who is just, their population is so diverse, you have just really no idea what you're going to get. I could get that same diversity, but it's just within a much narrower band. If I go somewhere like, for example, Yale, I kind of have a better idea of what I'm going to expect from the population of 1,000 undergrads per class at a place like Yale. So the difference is really in the culture of the firms, the style, the way that they work, and also just what the brand means to you in terms of your alumni network. I would argue that there are some differences in terms of training and exit opportunities that kind of come out of that as well. But those are some of the key differences. We do have a video on that also on the website, so I'd really recommend you take a look at that. And then what kind of growth do we project for the industry in the next 10 years? So consulting is kind of interesting. It was pretty insulated, not entirely insulated, but it certainly, it rises faster than the general economy and falls slower than the general economy, even though that will vary by firm. So on the industry level, you're going to find that consulting services do contract in contracting economic times, and they boom in booming economic times. But in general, the growth of the industry being so dependent on the macroeconomy, that's something to think about in terms of the next 10 years. However, there are huge markets for consulting that are still relatively untapped. Like almost all of Asia very irregularly uses consulting in terms of their processes. So in the US, we have a pretty well-developed, very nuanced, multiple level niche, mid-tier, high-level boutique big, large global firm system that's been building up since the 1950s. In Asia, there is a like incredibly fragmented system, really small consulting firms, and then huge national conglomerates. That huge middle ground has not even begun to fill in yet. So I think that there's still really a lot of substantial growth. I would estimate probably at least double-digit growth, outpacing a lot of other markets in the next 10 years. So I'm very bullish on consulting. You know, I started working with Management Consulted in 2010. I've been in consulting since 2005. I've really only seen an increasing appetite, even with the craziness in the macro economy. Okay. So awesome. So those are a couple of the questions. So let's go back to a couple of these, right? If you get 6 days to prepare for an interview and you've never prepared for 4, how would you prioritize the preparation process? I love that very specific question. Federico, you're clearly well trained. So 6 days to prepare for an interview. Number one is that you cannot spend too much time in the upfront process strategizing quietly, because the most important thing that needs to happen is awkwardness and practice has to happen really early on. So the big mistake that a lot of people make is that they're like, oh, 6 days to prepare. I'm going to spend 3 days reading and knowing about cases, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the time practicing. That's kind of how we typically would handle academics or exams, right? I'm going to spend like 3 days reading the textbook and reading my notes, and then 3 days actually practicing for it. And that just really does not work in this type of situation. So you need to start talking out loud on your first day. So I would recommend a mock interview right away, just talking through questions, walking through your resume, and trying to do, if you have a case involved, a case interview. Getting feedback on that early would be really beneficial. Then out of your feedback, strategically practice, strategically read, strategically figure out what you need to work on. Spend about 2 days practicing that, and then spend your last 2 days pulling it all back together again. So that's how I would spend 6 days on the road to a top consulting interview. Okay, just going back to some other questions. So when I say email for someone, for networking with someone in the firm, do I mean mail on LinkedIn? I actually very specifically do not. When I said LinkedIn, what I mean is you can find them, you can find their name. When I say email, I mean I want an email in my inbox. If you message me on LinkedIn, I have to actually have that message open in my app, or I have to get the email from LinkedIn and then go to my app in order to respond to it. You're creating an extra barrier and an extra step for me. Besides, I think you're creepy. Why are you looking at me looking at me on LinkedIn? We're not connected already. I mean, I understand why you're looking at me, but it doesn't compel me in any way to actually write you back. So email is just gets you over that little barrier, and it makes it very easy for somebody to respond to you. So I would always advocate for email. How many times can you apply to the same company? Great question. You can apply a very large number of times if you apply to different offices and network with different people. A lot of the firms do not have great institutional memory. There is actually one firm, it's Gallup Consulting. You can only apply once in your lifetime. But pretty much everywhere else, yeah, you can apply a lot of different times. I would just recommend that if they don't take you past the first round, there's probably a reason why. So applying, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get different results is probably not the smartest way to go about it. Okay. Great. How do you get someone's email in a consulting firm? Okay, so we cover this in again, very specific detail inside the networking course. And in fact, inside that networking course, we have a database that lays out the email moniker for each of the firms. If you have someone's first and last name, you can do that. We didn't get that from somewhere. We didn't buy it. We built it. So the way that we built it, you could build too, which is basically you find someone inside the firm, you deconstruct it, and then you rebuild the names, right? So you get their email by doing a little bit of research on LinkedIn or Google or on their website, and then you write to them directly. Okay, great. And then one more question about recruiters. So how cautious should your search be? So in our free material, we hinted at how third-party recruiters basically just filter candidates out of the pool to reduce the workload for the consulting firm. That's absolutely correct. The only difference would be at more senior levels. So when they're hired, when an executive search firm is hired to bring in a partner or a manager, they do a lot of the work. But they actually do also do a lot of the outreach. If you're looking at an executive recruiter at a junior level, they are more likely going to be gatekeepers for the firm as opposed to really like high potential advocates for you to help. Okay. So is it safe to assume that recruiters are actually a little dangerous? Yes. I would assume that all recruiters are dangerous. In fact, recruiters are the only people inside the organization that have institutional memory. So if you go through a recruiter and then they don't like you and you try to go behind them into the magic area where the professionals are, it's considered devious and political. If you go directly to somebody internally first and then they recommend you to the recruiter, then that's perceived entirely differently inside the firm. Okay, so are there blacklists? Yes. Are recruiters dangerous? Yes. Should you actually, go through executive recruiters? If they bring opportunities to you that you think are attractive and you think you're qualified, yes, just recognize that their goal is to bring a wide range of people in, not necessarily to advocate for you. Okay. Awesome. Great. Let's go back to the question list because we have a couple more to cover. Consulting skills. So what do we do to improve consulting skills, including books, MBA studies, mentorship, et cetera? Okay. So this is actually something that we really care about at Management Consulted, and we've started building courses. In fact, I was pregnant last year and I went to the hospital while building one of our courses because I was a little too intense about focusing on Excel for consulting. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend the level of intensity, but I would say that our materials are really strong. We also have other recommendations of other materials for things like Excel. We're in the process and are going to be over the next couple of years building out even more advanced materials on consulting skills, because I think that there is a tremendous education gap there. But for right now, we do have an Excel for consulting course, and we have a PowerPoint for consulting course, and we're going to be rolling out a couple of others that are kind of in that similar vein, and also adjacent pieces of those courses. So we're updating, next month, we're actually updating our Excel for consulting course. So basically, the number one way that you can improve consulting skills is by utilizing them. That's why we've created the courses that we have. So other than that, if you're not able to do that, being on the job in an internship or an externship of consulting is great. If you're in any kind of proximity to an academic environment, one of my number one recommendations is get involved and build relationships with the tech transfer office. When PhDs are creating new intellectual property, the university usually owns that intellectual property, but then they have a vested interest in monetizing that intellectual property. They have an office in almost every major university that provides access to support for the tech transfer, and they're often looking for consultants even for free. So just practicing on what you're doing to build other information can then give you access to other mentors or people who are doing similar type of work in the space. Okay. How does consulting relate to entrepreneurial skills or savvy? I love this question. They are two different things. Consulting is not the same as entrepreneurship. Becoming a consultant can make you either a better entrepreneur or a worse entrepreneur, but it cannot make you an entrepreneur. Okay, and the way that it can make you a worse entrepreneur is that consulting is naturally a very risk-averse field. You are naturally on the sidelines. You're naturally in an ivory tower investigating opportunities and providing recommendations. You get your hands not too dirty in the process. So I've seen a lot of consultants that probably had some entrepreneurial verve in the focus of just growing up in the management consulting firm. They lose it because they don't have to anymore. They're fat and happy and they're not hungry anymore. Entrepreneurial skills are things like selling. You really don't gain that as a consultant. Even as a consultant salesperson, a partner, you're still selling in a very kind of modified, sterilized environment. So there are some things that you cannot learn in consulting. There are some ways that consulting can make you worse. Consulting, though, can also make you a better consultant, a better entrepreneur. I would argue that it made me a better entrepreneur. I was an entrepreneur before consulting. I was an entrepreneur after consulting. My businesses after consulting have been worth millions of dollars. My businesses before consulting were not. All of them were profitable, but I definitely had a better clarity, better strategy, and also just honestly probably a better pedigree, better background. So I was more skilled when I was actually doing work afterwards. Great. So quick question that came through: what degree of Excel is needed for consulting? So I would say that the most important thing is that you need to be able to build scenarios in Excel and modify what you're doing in Excel based on those. So macros can enable you to do that. Formulas can create the flexibility to modify scenarios. But we actually walk through our Excel course is 32 modules because we broke down the difference between knowing the mechanics of Excel, so knowing shortcuts and knowing kind of details and specific information about Excel. And then on the other side, making sure that you actually understand like what a model would look like and feel like and how you would create some of the inputs and the recommendations and be able to like notify what those are so that you could modify them if somebody asks you to. So we made it very practical and very real world. And actually in our update that we're going to do next month, our focus for that is on making sure that you actually have like a more of a brief that's like a consulting brief without access to really anything that you would have access to beforehand. So it's very much like a consulting project or model, and then you have to build information off of it. So we'll give you a couple of data sets. We'll also give a couple that have no data sets, and then we'll provide some guidance on how long it should take you, what it should kind of look like, and then we'll give you an example finished model so that you can kind of try out your integrated skills as well. So if you know macros and you know VBA, that's great. And you definitely don't have to. Some people that know those kind of functions still don't understand how to build strategically a consulting focused model. So you kind of have to understand the two of them together. Okay. And then final questions on the miscellaneous side. So what's the best piece of advice I would give my 23-year-old self? Such a good question. Number one is just go for it, right? And this is actually something that I employed, I think, pretty well when I was 23. That's how I wrote a book in the first place. That's why I traveled around the world. I shaved my head. I went up to CEOs at dinners and told them that I had my resume and wanted jobs and was interested in adding to their organization. I was, really fearless. And so I would advocate for going back to my 23-year-old self. I would advocate for that for those of you that aren't already that way, just because the courage to ask for or pursue opportunities opens doors that otherwise would be closed to you. And you really, as 23 years old, have almost nothing to lose. You can reset your career by going to another job. You can reset your career by going to graduate school. You can reset your career by moving to a different city. So even if you like mess up royally and majestically, you can still really reset your life, okay? So if you have something that's in your heart, a company you want to start, a person you want to meet, place you want to go, get the heck out there and do it. Okay, that's my number one. But the things that I didn't do when I was 23 that I would have loved to do, number one, I really did need good brand name experience on my resume. If you guys get one brand name experience on your resume, it will set you up for a very long time. So I would definitely advise that you do something like what I did maybe even earlier, which is get a strong brand name on your resume as a 1 or 2 year major work experience. Have some fun doing it, really soak up learning from it. And then the thing that I didn't do very well is that I've had to go back and kind of open up a lot of these relationships. But after I left some of the early places that I lived and worked, I only maintained some of my relationships. And I would say that I was too narrow in my focus of that. I could have been much better as a strategic networker. I could have a much bigger active network right now of people that I could call on. And I personally really went for depth over breadth. And I think I could have been more strategic about maintaining both of those. So just going back to networking, it's definitely not just to get into jobs. I think I could have maintained an active conversation and network that really would have opened up even more opportunities for me. It's not like I need more opportunities. I have a great life, but I would just recommend that for you guys. And then what does the day-to-day life of a consultant look like? Okay, this varies so much on firms. Like, like I mentioned, Lisa or Imran, who's one of our other McKinsey consultants, would say that McKinsey is kind of like a churn and burn kind of place. Like you've got to get in, you fly out on Monday morning, you're working until 10 every day with your team, but on Thursday night, you're basically done for the weekend. You would work a little bit in the office on Friday, do a lot of admin, and then you kind of would be at it next week. At Bain, we had a much more cyclical process because we staffed out of our local offices. I didn't travel as much. And so it depends a lot on the cycle of the project, but basically it's very much like academics. If you're used to that, you'll feel very familiar here. You have 1 week, which is like the first week of class where you're getting introduced to the concepts. You basically have total freedom. In your second week, you're kind of beginning to do like homework and research and build your initial deliverables. In your third week, you're kind of building up to stuff, delivering some of the initial pieces. And your fourth week is like midterms. Right? And then you do that all over again for your final project. So you kind of start with a slow week and then you kind of build up to a crazy week and you go back to a slow week and there's a very cyclical nature to it. So the one thing that I would say is pretty consistent though, is that you will almost definitely in almost every consulting firm use Excel every day and use PowerPoint every day. So you're doing a lot of analysis and then you're translating that to visual presentation. Okay. Great. I'll take a last couple of questions. You guys have stuck with me for such a long time. I really thought this was going to be like 15 to 30 minutes. I'm so glad to see the appetite for this. We should definitely plan to do it again. But let me go ahead and answer the last few questions before we have everybody sign off. Okay. So, let's go into, here we go. How often would you reach out to consultants who really liked you during recruiting cycles after you miss an internship if the firm tells you to apply later for full-time? Really, you only need to reach out when you have some substantive follow-up information. So what I didn't do, for example, just to go back and be clear about what I didn't do, like when I left Bain, I didn't let everyone know when I was moving to a new city. I didn't let everyone know when I was moving to a new job or when I was engaged in a new company. I didn't kind of follow up with them as they were making their transition. So I would observe things. I would see changes in status on LinkedIn, for example, or I would see kind of a joint email go out, but I wouldn't personally reach out. And I think I could have done a much better job of that. So frequency is actually not really the key. It's really the substance of what you're reaching out with. So if you missed an internship, you want to go back for full time, you should absolutely do it. And I would just highly, highly recommend it. But your number one goal is to have a great internship that you do really well in over the summer. Let them know when you're about to start the internship. Hey, here's where I landed over the summer. Really excited to take advantage of the opportunities. What are 2 things that you'd recommend that I ask for in my summer to really make sure that I'm ready for full-time recruiting? And then follow up with them at the end of the summer, letting them know it went really well. I got an offer. I'm really excited to come back for recruiting. I love to have options on the table. Okay. And then we'll use this as our final question. So regarding brand name experience, I worked for a manufacturing partner, several Fortune 500 firms, as a business partner, mitigated supply chain risk. So that's kind of like, would that experience qualify as brand name experience? Absolutely. So you would need to, in your resume, make sure that it's very visible that which Fortune 500 firms you worked for. Ideally, if you work directly for one of the firms, that's going to pop a little bit more. It's going to be in bold and big letters. But if you see it inside somebody's text, you'd want to just make sure that you prioritize it. Would it be better to work for one of the Fortune 500s directly? Yes, it would. But can you spin and sell that? Absolutely, you can. Okay. What's a good source for future consultants that want financially modeling, market research, and other basic accounting skills? Are online platforms acceptable? Is it best to get a certification or chase after a master's degree? Yeah. So basically, like if you guys look at our courses, right, you can do PowerPoint and Excel for consulting for like $400 total. Would it be valuable for you to go and get a master's degree? I mean, there are like masters in business analytics program, totally, 32 grand later if you're in the same city and 50 grand later if you have to move. I'm not entirely sure that that's worth it. I think on the job training is actually way more valuable and you're getting paid at the same time. So I think some combination of external training, things that you can do like on our platform, really basic stuff in places like lynda.com, more advanced like financial training, things like breaking into Wall Street or Wall Street prep. I think those get you really a lot of the way to what you need to do, because really you just basically have to be able to explain to somebody that you can do it. And then you're going to get a lot of internal training on the job. So I would recommend some combination. If what you really want is just a period of time to invest in yourself, go for it. It just might be expensive. Acknowledge the expense may not actually pay itself back, especially in the near term. Okay. Awesome. I'm thrilled to help you guys today. We remain available to you. So Naman answers questions pretty much every day. So if there are things that came out in the conversation today that you think in 15 minutes about, just please send us an email. Naman's going to follow up with all of you guys. If you have other questions, you can reach back out to him. He's kind of our, maven of all things that are consulting related. He can point you to where our free resources are on the website, where resources from people that aren't us, but that we would really highly recommend. Our vested interest is for people to get pumped about consulting, to get into consulting, to get out of consulting into jobs that they love. So we really look forward to supporting you guys in the process. Okay. If you want to do something like this again, just make sure to send us a quick email and let us know that you want to do it again. And maybe in about a month's time, we'll probably schedule another one. Okay. Awesome. Great. Have a great day, you guys.